Welcome to another episode of Unzip, Reboot, Leave URL podcast. Today we have someone who is working as a coach and mentor for the last 3 decades in Australian corporate environment. And today, because of this insecure and unsettled time in the corporate world, we will typically talk about how an individual can grow in this insecure time. So today we have Adrian Jobson with us. How are you, Adrian?
Yeah, I'm great, Gautam, and great to be on your podcast and great to cover this topic as best I can, of course. It's a very large topic, and I know it's very relevant to lots and lots of people now in this volatile space that we find ourselves in.
Right. So the first question is, how can an individual maintain clarity and conviction when the business world is constantly changing, shifting, and simultaneously a lot of redundancy happening?
Yeah. Look, it's a good question. If you wouldn't mind, what I may do is backtrack a little bit to why I guess I'm speaking on there both as a coach, consultant, and mentor, because I think I do bring perhaps quite a distinct approach for people to take within this discussion. And everybody has an opinion, as you know, particularly about office politics and how to be able to survive and perhaps even flourish from wherever they are and whatever their circumstances. And so I typically joined the corporate world in a way, in a very sort of blind, if you like, and fairly dysfunctional way. I got a job in banking and finance and worked my way up the ladder, more or less, if you like, unaware, if you like, of the politics around me. I was a very focused individual. What I lacked in let's say attributes and intelligence, I probably made up for in terms of energy and focus. And so what I was trying to do, of course, like I saw, was to grow. We'll come back to this topic about how to grow in an unstable and viable or volatile space. And so in the end, I got to this stage of what we call progressive incompetency. In other words, I was quite senior in the bank. I was quite young, but I really didn't understand the dynamics of what I was doing and what I was playing at. So the relevance of that was that I was, if you like, in an internal consulting role. I really didn't understand what I was doing. I went back to university to do quite a depth master's program in organisational change, culture and behaviour, to really understand, if you like, the dynamics of what I was doing. And of course, after that, and a salutary lesson about how not to try and change an organisation. It wasn't all bad, but it certainly wasn't an outstanding success, as most change things are. It did give me a great sense of perspective about, in this particular case, about how people can grow, particularly younger people. So the first thing that I realised was that in order for me to be able to grow, and I think we all have this, if you like, this generic term in our mindset, what does growth mean? Probably like you and I, we came out of a family environment. I remember, I don't know where you came in your family, Gautam, but I was the runt of the litter. I was the smallest. There were all these big people, then my brothers and sisters were in front of me. And I could vividly remember being measured, like most children were, on the door frame. So in other words, every year that I grew, I was trying to actually catch up with my brothers and sisters. So I was, let's say, made positive by the fact that every 3 or 6 months, I would get a pencil line just a little bit higher in my growth. But what was happening, of course, my brothers and sisters were doing it as well, which was pretty annoying. So what I'm saying is we have this sense of what is our growth? What are we trying to chase here? And so I'm going to come back to this topic now after telling a couple of stories, I guess. But the biggest opportunity people have is to have this prevailing positivity about themselves as people. And I've got to say, you're one of the most positive people I know, Gautam, that no matter what sort of shows up for you, you have this resilience and I guess intelligence to be able to make the most of what you're doing.
Thank you.
Because organisations are Organisations are structures of meaning. In other words, and we'll go into a little bit about where organisations how they form, because that's important. So organisations are structures of meaning. If we're negative, if we're not, let's say, positively positioned in our mindset, then what will happen is as we move into our workspace, what happens is, and it's called projection, the projection of people's individuals, personas, etc., will mean that, of course, that there'll be a downward force if you're negative, because you really won't be in control. And there'll be missed opportunities along the way for people to see that, in fact, your positive mindset, no matter what, is going to prevail. Just want to touch on one part of the subject, and it was, this is in the field of philosophy by a guy called Heidegger, and he talked very, very simply but sublimely about being and doing. What are we doing in our work? What's our task? What's the primary task? I've got a screen. I've got all this stuff. Who am I being? Is what Heidegger would ask. So who are you being and what you're doing are two different sides of your coin, and you must understand that if you're being a source of positivity and value to that space, then immediately you have this defensive capability, let's say, but importantly, you're more attractive to that system because you're positive. So first step is, for everybody, is to just simply stop and then be able to look around you and make sense of your environment. Now, this is no small feat, because, it's just like cleaning your teeth every day. We look at our world, and there's a functional physical space to this place. I step into my workspace. Here's my computer. Here's Fred, and here's Joanne, etc. This is my world. But I'm saying stop and just take a fresh perspective about what you're seeing. And so I don't mean to say we don't understand that the walls and all that, the functional physical space is there. But if you stop and then re-look around you to say, what am I seeing here? Now, the main thing that people need to have, and we all have it, but we don't use it, is what's called a cultural curiosity. In other words, we stop observing from our curiosity. We, of course, always look, otherwise we couldn't function. But employ your curiosity in what you're actually seeing, not to classify it, not to categorize it, but just to absorb it and say, what am I feeling here? What am I seeing? What am I thinking? So stopping is really important. The other thing that I'd suggest to everybody, and it's hard when you've got a very active life, is to have a journal. So every day when you either wake up or before you go to bed, have your exercise book and your biro. This costs nothing, maybe 20 minutes of your time, and practice having a journal that you can refer to, because as you go back through the journal, it's a basis of reality about what the patterned way of being, I guess that's a bit of jargon, what's our patterned way of being in our world that says, this is what I do, this is who I am. Now, once you start doing that, the paradox is you actually start to grow. So coming back to this growth idea of, well, what's the way that I'm going to measure my progress here? Yes, in the external world, it might be a promotion, it might be a pay increase, might be a pat on the back, whatever that is, etc. So numbers of positive, let's say, number of positive observations I make per week could be a good measure of your growth. Because going back to the way in which we got measured as children, which was a linear, might have been vertical, but it was a linear way of measuring us. what I'm suggesting to your audience here is we have to expand. So it's not a linear measure necessarily, but it's a really important one if we want to grow, because we actually become bigger. We might become bigger if we eat too much, by the way, but we'll become bigger personalities because we engage with the world in a very, let's say, open way. The world will make us bigger. Does that make sense?
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. So that means you are predominantly talking about being more than what is around. Okay. Now, this is a very good coin came from you because you are also an immigrant. Okay. And our starting of life in a new land is not necessarily like a local. It's very different. It's whatever is coming in our way and all these things. So the first 10 years, probably there is not much choice we have as such. And then we try to go into it. Okay. So now when I was an employee, which I couldn't play, didn't play, now I don't want to play, uh, which is when your surrounding leaders are insecure. Because a lot of my friends who are working, they are also saying that their managers also don't know when, that thing is coming to them. So when leaders are insecure, how can subordinates stay positive within
Yes.
that organization without leaving a job?
Yes. No, that's a really great question because, and I just want to come back to a point about organisational design because this might help people as well. We see our organisations as being, well, they just are. They're just there. We go in the morning, we come out, etc., etc. But interestingly, I think, is to understand the way in which organisations were created. Modern companies have only been around for let's say 200 years, but really in a modern sense, maybe about 150. Yeah. And so we have the organisations that were based on historical power, so to speak. We have the church, we have the family, or we have the military. Those three contexts for organisations are very clear. Now, what happens is, let's put the church aside because it's got a religious, if you like, ideology behind it. The one that we identify with the most as human beings, Gartham, is the family dynamic. And so what happens with families? Well, most of the time, and I guess this would be the same in perhaps almost every culture around the world, is the father sits at the head of the table. He's the breadwinner. He was the breadwinner. The wife's there and the rest of the children sit around the table, but the authority figure is the leader. Now, this is why I'm mentioning this. It's very important in our psychology to understand is that leaders, more or less, are the head of that power construct. Now, that's changing somewhat because, well, organisations are changing, but the power structure yet hasn't. And so there's a move now into new organisational design where for the future, particularly somebody in their 20s and 30s will experience in their lifetime, is that they will have a lot of what's called nominal power with everybody else in the organisation. And the hierarchy will be, let's say, broken down quite a bit, which it's starting to now. Coming back to the audience perspective about this, and that is, if I sense insecurity in my leader, what do I do? Because if you like, and by the way, as a leader, I was pretty insecure. Let me tell you, as a novice CEO, I was quite insecure. I may have faked it a fair bit, and I did get the job done on a number of occasions. However, when as a leader and as a follower, we have this power with, no power down here. And I'm going to ask people to change their game here. They have a lot of power that they're not using. Because the moment that they actually enable themselves to sense this person at the end of the table is not my father. This is not a dinner table. this is a commercial organisation or it's a service-based organisation or institution. How do I serve my leader? Is the key accountability for every follower. And what I'm suggesting, and it might sound a bit counterintuitive, is to give your leader the power that's missing by great followership. Now, being a great follower, being clear on your accountabilities, understand the job role that you have, understand the context, be a let's say, a beacon of your own authority in a space like that, which empowers your leader, is your leadership. Of course, the person can be insecure. They might be going through difficult times. They have families, they're human beings. Great leadership is, and this is this is my view, by the way, to everybody who's listening. This is simply my view, not anybody's, let's say, else's. But my view is that as a leader, I valued great followership rather than extreme intelligence and capability, because I knew I could count on people above and beyond what they thought of me. And so when people sense that, our leader's a bit insecure and we don't really know where we're going, etc., then that's possibly true. But to gain power for your listeners, you take up this role of being a great follower. Now, it's a big subject, but in a sense, you're taking back power without negating or criticising or pulling other people down. Just want to make one final point too, by the way, is that leaders these days, there's a lot of romantic jargon about leaders and about being a good leader, about this. From my perspective, great leaders are the ones who are great professional managers. And I judge my leaders on their professional management skills, and they just happen to be good leaders. We seem to have gone away from this notion of what does great management look like, and fallen into the trap of trying to personalise leadership as a context, when in fact it's a secondary issue. They're not fathers or mothers. They are great professional managers, or they're not. Well, that's got its consequences and its benefits. However, the leadership is a style issue, not a substance issue.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So on that, like the style issue, as you said, there are a couple of times I experienced, and few of my friends also kind of mentioned that sometimes, these subordinates, they would like to help their leaders, okay? They would stand up for something which can be done in a better way, or, in a good way, or whatever. But the leaders are also coming from an insecure place where they are not welcoming that. Rather, not welcoming that is one thing. Rather, because I'm speaking up, trying to choke whoever is speaking up. In that environment where definitely one thing is missing, which is fairness or transparency and all these things, clear communication is missing. How these employees can push that envelope little bit?
Yes. Oh, good question. I would say stop pushing. Stop pushing, because what happens with that, when people are in an organisational sense, when people are trying to help and the person can't recognise their, if you like, their approach or their willingness or whatever else, is for them to stop and to step back a bit and give that person, let's say, some space to do what they're doing. Now, this sounds a bit counterintuitive, but when you, I don't know, have you ever bogged a car in a very muddy space? In other words, the car goes down on its wheels. Mm-hmm. What happens, perhaps if there's 4 or 5 people in the car, Everybody, particularly at night, by the way, this happens a lot. Everybody piles out of the car and wants to push the car. Never works. Never works until there is a unifying, let's say, system, change in that perspective, etc., etc. Now, to the extent that the analogy or the metaphor is true, when you get out of the car, you've got a choice. The people like yourself, you've got a choice about your relationship to the car or the people around it. And if you say to yourself, and if you just say, stop, look, I think we're all pushing against one another here. How can we reorganize ourselves to do this better? Not like you have the answer, but what you do have, you create what's called a clarity or a clearing for the possibility of moving the car forward. Now, the leader doesn't necessarily know either. He was only, or she was only driving the car. They might have got it bogged, but you know what I'm saying? They're either a pusher or they're not a pusher, so to speak. So what I'm saying is when you stop, it's not like, well, you stop and do nothing. It's like you stop and you say, is there a better way that I can actually bring value to this situation? Yes or no? There may not be. But we're going to talk about creativity, by the way. So in a sense, there's a creative space available if you stop. If you don't stop, that's not available.
Okay. Another question which also kind of poking me for a long time, because in corporate world they talk about this passion, and you have to be passionate in your job first of all as an immigrant, and if you are in a early stage of life, whatever come to your way, you just grab it. So in the corporate world, for the foot soldiers, let's say they are not like freshers and a little bit high up, how does it matter, like their purpose? Yes, I mean, everyone has purpose, but to purpose which is aligned to the organization, how does it matter?
Well, again, you've used a couple of interesting words there, and language is critically important. I've just come back from overseas, and I spent a little bit of time in Turkey, and I was just blown away by the extraordinary history and everything else. But one thing that really came through to me was about my inability to communicate with people. And so suddenly I dropped into somebody else's world. So yes, I was a migrant many, many years ago, and I've got my own stories about the marginalisation I felt at that particular time. But it was very recent where I was trying to talk to people, and they just couldn't get it. They just couldn't understand. So I think language is critically important. Now, when you used a couple of words there, one is a subordinate, and one is a foot soldier. I want to express the idea that for positive people who have an agenda for a successful career, those terms don't hold a great deal of value, because talented people will never be a foot soldier, will never be a subordinate. Yeah,
I agree.
So, and I've worked now with, over the last, one of the things I've done over the last 5 years, or a couple of things, was to deliver the Thai program at Swinburne for young entrepreneurs. And over the last 5 years, I've spent with some councils on an innovation to accelerate business type program, in which there was a lot of people who were not from Australia. And so what stood out for me was the fact that their, let's say, other culture or other experience of that culture faded into the background, and their ambition and their focus were the things that were of value. And so when somebody who wants to grow, their agenda for growth is the primary thing that they have on their blackboard, so to speak. And the idea that they go into a firm, they're learning skills, they're getting experience, they're maturing, they might be trying some things out, etc., etc. So I just want to say language plays a critical role in this. I know how important it is because I just had a recent experience about how much it meant in the sense of communicating with people. So I understood that and the subtleties of that. But I would say for everybody that's listening, take great, not so much consolation, but encouragement to say, if you are genuinely ambitious and you have an agenda for growth, without patting yourself on the back and you know what I'm saying, have guarded enthusiasm, but privately have a lot. That's the only thing that will count.
Okay. So on that, like kind of a last question, which is in Australia specifically, or I guess in any corporate world around the world, there is a term is socializing. Okay. Now, various people are coming from various cultures, and you have to understand, respect their culture so that they can understand yours, you can understand them. And in some cases, if there are a lot of predominantly local people, they kind of stick to few cultures, right? Like in Australia, for example, beer on Friday with footy and stuff like that. Now, when you are like, how to mingle effectively socially when you have or employees or these people have lack of local cultural knowledge?
Yes, yeah, that is a really great question, because I guess part of my training was to understand things at the social level and the level of people in general. What are the cultures? What are the norms and values of one culture versus another? And so, being sensitive to the fact that you're in a different culture, that your language is new, etc., etc. How do we maintain our our balance when we move into that space? I want to come back to that word that I used initially, was become a really practiced observer of what it is that you're seeing and feeling, because feelings are the same no matter what country you're from.
Yep.
Now, so I'm going to go into a little bit of what's called ontology of observation. It's a big word, it's a clumsy word, but I want to ask for forgiveness for using it. But if we understand that our humanness has three distinct components. Our mindset, if you like, our emotions, our physiology, and our language. Now, two of those things everybody will remain. You'll have your physiology, your biology, in other words, and you will have your emotions. Now, emotions are beyond language. We know that. So there's emotions come and go. There's about 70 of them. You know, if you listed all the words, whether it was in an Indian language or in language anywhere else, you would have a lot of words for what we call emotions. And we also have moods. There's only 4 or 5 moods that we can be in, but there's lots and lots of emotions that we can be. Now, when the listeners are inside a space and they're doing this or they're doing that, they might just want to check in with themselves and say, because moods prevail over months, weeks, months, and years. Feelings come and go. You've got a feeling now, I've got a feeling now, it comes and goes. People can check in and say, how am I feeling? What's the word that I'm feeling? When they ground themselves into themselves as human beings, this is where the ontology piece comes in. When you ground yourself, when you can feel your feet on the ground, when you're in possession of your body, you're standing up straight, and you walk into a room, your presence is large. When you have a feeling of scarcity, let's say, or concern, that embodies your biology. And so if you just be able to, and it's easy for me, I guess, training, easy for us as older guys, so to speak, check in with yourself and say, what's my feeling? Well, it's one of positivity. Who am I going to meet in this group of people? And this is a hard one. I've worked with a lot of people from the Indian subcontinent, a lot of people. I know now that there's a lot of Indias, there's a lot of regions, there's a lot of language, there's a lot of cultures, and understanding that there is great diversity around our country, and respecting my ignorance is a good thing. So I'm immediately being able to ask a genuine question to say, why is this happening this way? And the other thing is, and this takes some thinking about, because it was a really good question. How do I make a comparison with my own culture, my mother culture, if you like, to, let's say, investigate? Well, I do it this way. I mean, we've got neighbours who are celebrating Diwali, for instance. Now, I walked past them and I said, "Happy Diwali," and not understanding a little bit about that term, only a tiny bit. But it gave me a great sense of human, what's the word, equity, to acknowledge somebody else's, let's say, culture and religion. So there's something about, and I don't know, I feel quite ignorant in answering the question, to say, don't dismiss your culture, but don't not use it to say, what is this? What's the Friday footy about? Or, you know, what is this about? And again, come back to the genuine you become the observer, and you use genuine curiosity to ask those questions, because that's the bridge.
Yes.
Your biology and your curiosity are the bridge.
Right. So definitely that genuineness kind of is a bridge to understand them, and they also can open up. You also can open up. Don't be judgmental. Don't be opinionated about whatever it is.
Yes. And share.
Yeah, exactly. As like we discussed about it like few times privately, I know you are a master, and you worked on it on HBDI. Though I am a big fan of Big Five personality, um, please explain for our audience the reason I am asking you, because when I learned about Big Five, it just like opened my eyes, and my awareness level gone up tremendously, and which helped the way I behave in the world. So please explain on HBDI model and how for self-awareness and awareness of the world.
Yeah. Thank you, Gautam. I'm a real follower, if you like, of the Big Five personality test. I think Peterson has been brilliant at condensing if you like, those various types of personality and intelligence. Just to run through those, because I think they're all relative to human brain. The first one is extroversion, what I call social energy. How energetic are we when we walk into a room, for instance? Agreeableness, which is concern for others. How do I express my concern, or do I express my concern? My wife tells me not enough, by the way, in terms of agreeableness. Conscientiousness, organisation, and order and structure. Now, I have a propensity to leave things half done, she tells me as well. And neuroticism, which sounds like a disease, but in fact, it's just the degree to which we have negative emotions. So that's a complete and utter simplification. But that's the Big Five, and it's really, I recommend anybody. It's very, very simple to do, to get that assessment. And if you're in a couples situation, the couples report is truly illuminating in terms of, you know, our couple relatedness. Herman Brain was interesting for me because I saw, when I looked out as a manager and as a leader, that we were all intrinsically, we were all different in the way in which we thought. So in other words, the Big Five measures in a quantitative way the strength, if you like, of each of those aspects. Herman Ned Herman was he was the learning and development manager for GE back in the 80s. He created this model. It's probably used by 90% of the Fortune 500 companies still in the world. It's available in both team and individual. And primarily it's saying, look, we have two hemispheres to our brain. And so right and left, and also upper and lower. And so to a certain extent, about 50% of people will roughly have what's called a double dominance in their brain. They might be higher brain, lower brain, they might be right brain or left brain, etc. But hemispheres count, and it's still validated today, even though it became less popular, and now suddenly there's more research to say that in fact more than ever that brain dominance is a key driver particularly in terms of our organisational effectiveness. So upper brain is rational thinking and conceptual thinking. So higher order thinking, so to speak. Lower brain is what's called limbic brain. It's about order and structure, and it's about people. Now, about 50% will be double dominant, and the rest will be either triple dominant or single or quadruple. But what happens with Herman is that it's a wonderful, simple way of you understanding if you like, the predisposition that we have in the way that we think and how everybody else thinks. We now know that the brain sits on this thing called the corpus callosum. Sounds pretty significant. What it's doing is it's doing this all the time. The right brain and left brain, upper and lower, they dance. Now, for everybody, the tune's different, even though that it might be, you might have the same brain dominance as somebody else, let's say. For instance, I work a lot in schools. School managers versus school managers are predominantly lower. So they're limbic brain, and they have a fairly typical, if you like, score. But they have different, if you like, of course, they have different brains and they think differently. It's just the bias is there. So in a sense that somebody can use that to not only inform themselves about giving themselves permission, do I need to be more creative here? And we're all creative, by the way. We just choose not to think that way most of the time. However, it gives you the opportunity of saying, I wonder whether that person is sitting next to me. I wonder what their brain dominance is, because they could be thinking in a completely different way. They might, I've worked closely with engineers, for instance, at times, very left-brained, very what's called blue-brained, high-level concepts, but also very strong structurally in laying something out and getting the details right.
Right. Okay. So it's more of a like a thought process, or how like we can basically align with a different thought process, right?
Yes, we can
It's more. It
recognize.
sounded to me more outward. Like Big Five is more inward looking. Is that right?
Yes, in the sense of, I think that's a good observation. Yes, in the sense of how I apply myself in the world. And so I can then say, because there's nothing, we all have beautiful brains, but if I find that I'm approaching everything as a problem, I might find, in fact, that I'm a really good problem solver. So I'm blue, high level, I'll solve this problem because I'll apply my brain to this and I'll solve it. But forgetting that the red part of the brain, the limbic right part of the brain, relates to people. So in the sense of me problem solving all the time, I might be drifting away from the people that are going to make a difference anyway. And this is why creativity has 5 or 6 core competencies that we all have, more or less. Innovation's only one of those things that reside in other parts of the brain. That's why we say, oh, I'm not creative. I am creative. I'm a real innovator. We make that decision based on the blindness of where all of those other elements of our brain play into and drive, if you like, effective creativity.
Right. And so understanding those kind of give you an idea of, okay, maybe this creativity thing here, I probably need a little bit of more problem solving. Here, I'll need a little bit of
Yes,
more aesthetic things. Here, probably I need a little bit of more people-oriented
yes,
thinking
yes,
and stuff like that.
absolutely spot on. Because the moment that you give your brain the choice, it'll do it. Your brain will do it. It's just that we don't think that we have an automaticity to our preference, let's say, when in fact we don't need to all the time.
And some of the things are kind of innate to us. Is that right? Like maybe some
Yes,
people are by default a little bit more people oriented. They have to work a little hard to be,
it's biology. It's biology through and through. We are given our biology, our DNA, and our biological, if you like, blueprint. How we're raised, how we're educated, all of those things will make a difference. I've worked in marketing studios before, and it's been intensely creative. My Herman score will go that way. If I work in a manufacturing company, which I've done, there's a tendency for the brain to, if you like, start to apply itself to my situation. It does take time, but it certainly happens.
right. Okay. So last question to you as a coach. So please give us the top 5 tips for the professionals who want to grow as an employee. So we already discussed very nicely. Number one is being.
Yes.
Number 2 is respect and resilient your surroundings.
Yes. Yes. And if I could put that another way, always find ways to add value to your surroundings.
Right.
And
right.
that way it gets you out of the loop of what's happening in the office politics. And I guess number 4, which would be, this sounds a bit convoluted. Don't surrender to the interaction. And so in office politics, the conversational, if you like, climate. Look into your organisation as you would with the weather. What's the climate? Do I need to be involved in this conversation? If somebody speaks harshly to you, take a breath. Do I need to surrender to this interaction? You have a choice. Exercise the choice. The moment that you exercise the choice, of course, you're not going to be abused, etc., etc. Once you exercise choice, you have power. If you don't, if you surrender to the interaction, you have no choice and no power.
Yep. Okay. So on that, anything else you want to add?
Only this positivity thing that we, I think, hopefully the takeaway has been is that power comes from positivity. And so if you want to step into a different environment, spend a bit of time in front of the mirror, ground yourself, literally be in yourself, so to speak, because very often we're not in our bodies, we're somewhere else. Be there as best you can and practice that. Even breathing techniques. People do a lot of things these days. There's a huge amount of information around. Don't drown in too much information and doing this or doing that. Use the biology and the capacity that you have to be positive and value adding.
Right. So on that, we better end the podcast. Thank you, Adrian. Thank you for your time.
My pleasure.
Yeah. And so as for my audience, as you know, if you want to live your life in your own terms, this is the right place for you. So on that, we end this. Thank you very much. Thank you, Adrian.
Yep. Thanks, Gautam. Bye-bye.